Hey guys, welcome in, welcome in. So I'm going live on YouTube and on TikTok at the same time. So just give it a couple minutes for people to come in. Just a little bit clearer. Hello. Okay, so this is my first time going live. I'm actually really excited. So today, as you can tell by the title of this live, today's focus is on what happens when God tells you to help someone that has hurt you. So I feel like we've all been in situations like that before. I don't know what that is. Okay. All right. I feel like we've all been in situations like that before where somebody has done something to us because that's what happens in life. But then what would happen if in that situation where someone has betrayed you, where you felt like genuinely you were done wrong, what would happen if God then turned around and called you to actually help that person, to help the one that hurt you or bless the one who broke you? Like, would you have the ability to meet the call? Would you in turn risk jeopardizing everything that you're supposed to accomplish, the promise that you have over your life, in the essence of wanting to make sure that they do not get more than what they deserve? So, to help us with this conversation, I have consulted with the Bible. So, this is essentially a live Bible study because I don't want it to just be my opinion on what you should do. I think it's easy for anybody to say, if you're in this situation, this is what you should do. But I want to look at situations that we can support with scripture in which people were called. This is not like a new thing. This is not a unique experience, even though it may feel like it. There have been multiple cases in scripture that we can point to where people were betrayed. They were sometimes left to die. And then they ended up in a situation where they then had to help the person that has hurt them, that has betrayed them, that turned their back on them. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. And then this is a series. So we're going to be looking at a different character, a different story every single day for the next week. So make sure that y'all turn on notifications. Make sure that you come back every night at 9 p.m. We're going to be looking at a different story of someone who was betrayed, but then had to turn around and help the person who hurt them or bless the person that betrayed them. Today, we're focused on Joseph. So Joseph is in Genesis, and I'm going to go over what happened just for anybody that's not familiar with Joseph's story, while also weaving in how this applies to us. So when we look at Joseph and who he was, Joseph, he was the favorite. He had favor from birth. He was his father's favorite, one, because his father had him later in life. So Joseph was born to a father who shouldn't have been able to have him. So we see from the very beginning of this story where we have the fulfilled promise. So Joseph, he shouldn't have been able to be born. His father shouldn't have been able to have him at the age that he had him. And so that's one facet of it. And then we also have to look at the fact that Jacob also had favor in regards to the fact that because his father was older, most likely he had gained some wisdom by then. So he was raised by a father who was a little more mature than what he was for his other siblings. So then we think about it. He was essentially the embodiment of a late harvest and the fruitfulness that can come from a late harvest. And that is, for some of us, the situation that we're in, where people may be looking at you as the embodiment of a harvest, and you may not even see it in yourself. But Joseph, like I said, he had favor from the very beginning. And as a result of the favor and the fact that he was the favorite, his brothers were envious. They were jealous. And that ultimately led to what later happens in the story. And so for some of us, we have experienced jealousy. We have experienced betrayal from our family members because they saw favor in us that we couldn't even see for ourselves. They were harvesting and harnessing negative feelings and beliefs and just all of these things that towards us that we didn't even create. There are people in somebody's life that's watching this who are upset with you because of situations and circumstances that you have no control over, but they are harnessing and carrying this negativity, this ill will. And sometimes it's not that they're targeting you, sometimes it's just that it breeds misunderstanding. When you have favor over your life, that is something that God gives to you. It's something that you don't create for yourself. And so people that don't carry that same favor in their lives, they're not going to have the ability to even understand you. They're looking at your life and they're comparing their life to yours, and they're trying to figure out why you have things that they feel like are owed to you, or you got things easier than what they were able to get them, and they're feeling some sort of way about the favor that you have over your life. And it's not anything that you created, anything that you tried to create for yourself. It's just something that is just because of who you are. And so that was essentially what happened with Joseph. And so his brothers carried this jealousy towards him. And I want to just point out too that every single thing, I keep saying it, every part of Joseph's life was filled with favor from the beginning. And that's the same for you watching, listening to this. Your life had favor from inception. Nobody can take that favor from you. And we're going to continue to talk through what happened to Joseph. And it's going to prove that nobody can take the favor that God has bestowed on your life. Nobody has the power to do that. Sometimes we will find ourselves in different situations and different places, and it will make us feel like we have lost favor, but you have not lost favor. God is the only person that can take it from you, and he wouldn't. The promise that he has for your life is withstanding despite the circumstances and despite how it looks from the outside. So remember that. So I just want to say that the betrayal is a part of the promise. So God is going to show you the promise, and he's going to reveal your purpose to you before anybody else can understand it. So going back to the story of Joseph in the Bible, and for anybody joining, hello. We are in Genesis. We're talking about Joseph, and we are exploring what would you do if God called you to help the person who hurt you. So when we think about Joseph coming forward and talking to his brothers and then his father about the second dream that he had, they had two completely different reactions. And this is something that until I reread this for this conversation, I didn't even realize. So his brothers were immediately jealous. Once he told his dream, they were jealous. One, because it implicated them and that he was going to be above them and they were going to bow down to him. But they had already been jealous of him. So anything that he probably would have told them that was favorable towards him and not to them, they probably would have been jealous regardless. Now, so that's the first part. Now, his father, on the other hand, he said that he would, well, he didn't say that he would, but the scripture tells us that he rebuked him first, but then decided to keep what he said in mind. And so the rebuking likely was a form of protection. He needed to show the brothers that he was rebuking what Joseph had said. He needed to, not make matters worse because they were already very jealous of him. He needed to do something outwardly, but then he kept it in mind, meaning he wasn't immediately saying that what happened or what he saw was not true, or that he didn't have this ability, or that this wouldn't come to pass. He said he would keep it in mind. He was just going to keep it in mind, keep it in the back of his head. And I think that's important because a lot of times that is the first form of betrayal that a lot of us experience, is where we share our vision, we share our desires, we share our goals with people, and then we don't get the response that encourages us to keep moving. And for a lot of us, that first betrayal probably came from our parents, where we explained to them something that we desired. We explained a plan that we had for ourselves. And then, as it turns out, we didn't get the applause, we didn't get the validation. We might have been told that we're not pretty enough, that we're not smart enough, it's not the right time, you can't do that. We might have been told all of these different things, and that doesn't make them true. It just is our first form of betrayal for a lot of us. And so we have to, in that, understand that one of those responses comes out of a place of flesh, the other comes out of a place of discernment. And hopefully, we would all have parents or family members who are able to hold spiritual space for the calling that God has placed over us. But again, even if that does not happen, we have to understand that God plants the promise in us before anybody else can even understand it. So that's, I think, a lot of times why people say, like, you don't need to let everybody into what your goals are. You don't need to share everything with everybody. You can work in silence and, let success be, speak for you or whatever. And I think that's a lot of where that's rooted in, is that sometimes when you go out and you're trying to seek validation and you're trying to explain out of maybe excitement to people what God has placed on your heart, they may not be in a place to understand it. My mom always says that if God wanted them to understand it, then he would have said it to them. And I think that is what we see here, is that God had not revealed that to them. And there are some people in your life who they will never, ever, ever understand the calling that God has placed on your life. Even once it happens, they're not going to be able to comprehend how it was able to happen for you and not for them. Um, and I think it helps to even realize that Joseph's father, Jacob, he had his own experiences with prophecy, with a lot of the things that Joseph would then deal with. And so I think it made him a little bit more sensitive. And so in that way, even I think that God had prepared Jacob to be able to hold that spiritual space for his son. And I think that's a blessing in itself. So moving on. So I have notes here, guys. If you can't tell, I have notes. Make sure that y'all like this video. If y'all are with me, make sure that you like this video. Make sure that you guys leave any questions or any thoughts, comments, anything like that in the chat. Again, for anybody that is new tuning in, we are talking about what happens when God asks you to help the one who hurt you. So next, I want to just talk about how a lot of times we find ourselves in what I will describe as a pit, where everything around us has crumbled. We feel like we have reached rock bottom. And even in those spaces and in those times, God is still providing provision in that pit. He will ensure that in the midst of your betrayal, that you are still provided for. And this is a spiritual provision. So when we look at Joseph's story, at the point where where his siblings had decided that they wanted to kill him because they were jealous, they decided to kill him, and God inserted a Reuben. So Reuben, he stepped forward and he said, "No, we should not lay a hand on him. Let's do this instead. Let's just throw him into the cistern." And in that moment, Reuben is thinking that he's sort of delaying what's about to happen. He's intervening so that this can't happen. And then his plan is to go back and get him and then return him to the father. Before he can do that, they end up selling him as a servant. But regardless, Reuben was placed as essentially an intermediary. Like he is sent to delay what's happening. And so I encourage you to just think, like, in your life, as you felt like you're in this low place because people have turned their backs on you, they have betrayed you. Did God send a Reuben? because he always plants a but. And we can look at multiple scriptures that support this. So Reuben heard it in the midst of this plan, but Reuben heard it. They meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. You were cast down, but not destroyed. And so I think there are multiple examples where we see that God puts a but. He does not allow the enemy to have the last sentence in our story. He doesn't allow the enemy to have that sense of control over our narrative. And when we think about the situation, like they threw him in the cistern, and then as it turns out, it was empty. Normally it holds water. And while in a lot of ways that would be a negative thing, because if there's no water, that would, potentially imply that there's a drought, that people are going without water. But in this instance, it was a very positive thing because it allowed Joseph to stay alive for, in this time where they are meaning for him to die. And so when we think about that, that was intentional. That wasn't just by happenstance. This is what happened to be the case. This was by design. And I think for me, it helps to realize that some of these things are by design when they happen. And maybe it doesn't make it immediately feel better, but we'll get to that a little bit later, just about the importance and how it's necessary to figure out how to reframe how you interpret the pain that you've been caused. But and then so when we think about, he was thrown into the cistern, and then his robe was stripped. His brothers had plotted on him, but that didn't change Joseph's dream. And so Joseph received the dream that is what kind of started all of the jealousy and all of the negativity between him and his brothers. Just because they were upset about the dream, just because they didn't want it to be true, just because they didn't believe it, does not mean that it wasn't still to come. It still came to pass, even with all the doubt, even with all the negativity. Whatever God has placed inside of you, whatever he has told you is coming, it is still coming. I do not care who doesn't believe it, who doesn't see it, who doesn't think that you're capable of it, who hopes that it doesn't happen, who is praying against you, who is plotting on your downfall. If God has placed it inside of you, then it is happening. It's a matter of when, not if. It's a matter of how, not if. There is no if, there's only when. It's going to happen for you. And so I need you, whoever's listening to this, it is for you. Whatever God has placed for you, whatever they have intended for evil, God has intended it to be good for you because he's already prepared for you. He's already planned for you. And so, again, I want you to think about, who is your Reuben? Who has God called and assigned to protect the promise that he has already planted in you, because there's somebody there? And then can you recognize the empty cisterns in your life, the pits that you were placed in that were supposed to destroy you, that were supposed to take you out of alignment and get you further away from your promise, but that they turned out to be empty? These were spaces where people intended for you to fall and to fail, but you were able to take those same spaces and turn it into something good that would get you closer and closer to where you were supposed to be. I want you to identify those in your life. I want you to think about what those spaces are and who those people were. And then, these are the things that are keeping you alive, just for you to be able to get to your next chapter. For anybody that's new tuning in, we are talking about what happens when God asks you to help the one who hurt you. And so again, we've all found ourselves in spaces from time to time where we felt betrayed. We felt like people turned their backs on us. We felt like people didn't show up for us. They didn't reciprocate our efforts. And very rarely do we ever come back in those spaces and decide, despite what you've done, I'm going to actually help you. A lot of times we go the opposite route and we literally want them to perish. we say, if they were on fire, I would not put them out. But that is not, that's not the way, friends. It's not the way. Um, and so I just want to explore that today. And we are looking in Genesis at Joseph and finding the parallels and what we can learn from that. So this is a live Bible study with real life application. And if you guys see me looking both places, I'm on YouTube on my computer going live, and then we're on TikTok going live as well. So one of the key things about Joseph that I have said a few times, but if you're new, you might not have heard it, is that Joseph had a favor that followed him. He had a favor from birth. And it started kind of like with his dad, and he was the favorite child. And then it just follows him throughout his story. And so, with that, I want to just hone in on the part that although betrayal can change your location, it cannot change your favor. So in the story, we see that Joseph ends up losing everything. His brothers have stripped him of the coat that his father gave him, the comfort that he once had, his home, but they couldn't get rid of the covering that God had placed on him. And it continues to follow him even when he's been stripped from all of his worldly possessions. And so in those situations, and some of us may have experienced that before, where the people that we would think would protect us, would help us, would look out for us, they strip you of what they gave you. They take back, they kick you out the house. They refuse to help you, even if they have the resources to do so. They kick you out of the bank accounts. They take your car. They could do all kinds of things. They keep you from your children. Um, but even in that situation where you are taken, all the things are taken from you, God will still sustain you with what he has placed in you. And so, even in your lowest moments, those are the times where you're able to reach out to God and ask for his covering, ask for his grace, ask for his mercy, ask for, peace and all of these things, because he's the only one that can truly provide that, especially when you're in a situation like that may seem hopeful and hopeless and just terrible. And so with that, we realize that favor isn't a feeling. It's a function of God's presence. So when I say that Joseph had favor, I'm not talking about, oh, he had riches and he had money and he had opportunities and like everybody loved him. Because as we see, that's not necessarily the case. There were a lot of times where people took things from him, where they didn't like him, where they allowed their emotions to overpower anything else that God was trying to do in Joseph's life. And although favor is not going to prevent every problem, it will help preserve you through those problems. And thus we see that in this situation, every every source of pain in Joseph's life was then used as a platform, and it further prepared him for what was ultimately going to happen in his life. So we see him in when he was a servant in the house and he was over all of the household duties and all the things, and then the wife accuses him of trying to seduce her, come on to her or whatever. And then this is what ultimately uh, where he finds himself in jail. But while he's in jail, this is like the next crucial, necessary part of his story. He learns how to, or realizes that he has the ability to interpret dreams. His ability to interpret dreams ultimately gets him favor with the Pharaoh, which at that point, it teaches him to be able to manage people and manage resources, which is ultimately what he's going to use in the Pharaoh's palace, which is how he's going to kind of have the full circle moment with his brothers. And so it's just like you have to understand that everything that happens, although people may be, again, though they may mean it for evil, God has the ability to turn it into good. And that is so, so important to understand as we're thinking about what is happening when people do things. Now, and we're going to talk about Job. Job is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It's one of my favorite. We're going to talk about that another day over the course of the next week. But like sometimes we have a habit of saying that like the enemy is doing this and the enemy is doing that. We have to understand that the enemy cannot work on his own. Like his power is limited. And so I love Job because Job is an example of like this bad stuff was happening to you, but it wasn't because God like didn't look out for you. He didn't see it, or like the enemy surpassed God and was like just harming this man. It's because God gave him permission to do it. Like, oh, God gave the enemy permission to touch Job. So we'll talk about that another day. But yeah, like we have to reframe how we think about the stuff that happens to us, because and y'all can do it right now. Think about different things that have happened to you, and then when you look at like the silver lining of it all, you realize that like if that negative thing had never happened, then this positive thing also couldn't have happened. And when you and in the moment, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like sometimes these are the worst things that could have ever happened to us. But then when we are able to take a step back, once time has passed and once we understand the whole story, a lot of times we could come back and say, like, wow, if that didn't happen, then my life would have been drastically worse. Or if that didn't happen, this person over here would have never gotten XYZ. I would have never been led to do this, this, and this. And it might have been a terrible, horrific thing that happened. But when you're walking in purpose and you're following God's promise for your life, He will create a pathway that you can use to be able to turn that evil into good. And I think that is like ultimate faith right there, when you're able to trust God even when He's not doing what you would want to do, even when the story that He is writing for your life is not the story that you would have ever wanted to be in. That is ultimate faith. And so um we look at the different betrayal that the different examples of betrayal that Joseph experienced, and we realized that there was still favor. And for some of us that are listening to this, that favor, I mean, that betrayal could have been gossip and people making accusations against you. And but even in those situations, like we saw with the wife who accused Joseph of things that he was not doing, he turned that woman down multiple times, and she's still, because she didn't get what she was wanting and he kept rejecting her, he turns around and accuses him and lands him in prison. Him going to prison was probably the best thing that could have happened to him, because if he hadn't gone to prison, would he have become who he became? Would he have been able to have that moment with his brothers? Would he have been able to save all those lives from the famine that was going to come? Like, if you hadn't been betrayed by those people, if that family member, that friend, that whatever had never betrayed you, would you have been able to help all the people that are attached to the lessons that you learned in your betrayal? I want y'all to think about that. Think about it. Now, at each of these situations, he could have felt like, I've lost favor with God. I know that I was born into favor. I know that, I have escaped death. I know that I have been sold and been able to make the best of this situation, but I have lost favor with God. I want you to ask yourself, where have you mistaken a change in circumstance for a loss of favor? Because the two are not synonymous. When we see these things happening to us, a lot of times we can easily say, why has God forgotten me? Why is He not doing this for me? Why is He doing it for all these other people? Like, where have I gone wrong? And just because you're facing hard times does not mean that you have lost favor with God. this that you're experiencing is likely just a part of his bigger plan for you. And so, in being able to remain steadfast, staying committed to what God has told you, even if other people don't understand it, they don't see it, they don't believe it, that will allow you to have not only just peace, but it'll allow you to stay on track for what God has ordained you to do in your life. Now, um, so then now moving forward to the actual forgiveness part of this whole conversation. So in chapter 45 is when Joseph finally reveals himself to his brother. There has been this famine that he has saved this region from because of the dreams that he interpreted, and they were able to stockpile resources during their abundant period and then save those things and ration out resources for people when the drought inevitably came. Now, um, when that happened, his brothers end up coming to claim some money. I mean, claim some food. They are without food, and their father sends them to go get some food, not knowing that Joseph is still alive and that he is actually the one in charge of rationing out food. And so when they get there, they end up bowing before him because that is custom, and they don't realize that it is their brother. So when we get to chapter 45, that is when he ultimately reveals to them that he is their brother that they thought they got rid of and that he was dead. Um, so in that, I think this is the best part of everything. When he realizes, or when he allows them to know who he really is, he then tells them, "Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me there, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." That is so beautiful. Like, he's telling them, do not feel bad about what you've done to me. Like, yes, friend, you were wrong, but do not feel bad about it, because in you doing what you did, though it was not right, it allowed me to save lives of people that I did not know, that I could have never accounted for. And it put me in a situation to be able to help. And that becomes my reputation, not what all these people have done to me, not the lies that were told about me. My reputation gets to be that I saved a region of people because I was betrayed by you first. And so I think that that is such a powerful thing. And many of us, we struggle with that, just how to have grace in times when we realize that what was done to us wasn't right. And it does not excuse what was done to us, but it allows us to take control of our narrative. Now, a lot of times these people, they deserve they deserve they deserve for you to cuss them out. They deserve for you to be angry. They deserve all of that, but you don't deserve that. You don't deserve to hold on to the bitterness and the anger, the frustration, the disappointment, because that doesn't allow you to move into what God has purposed for you. Like, just imagine if Joseph had held on to the bitterness and disappointment and frustration from your siblings trying to sell you off. And they didn't even sell him for a lot of money. Like, it was not that much. So it's like, to experience that from people that you grew up with, that are supposed to be your family, that y'all got the same father, and they've done this to you. If he would have held on to the anger that we can only imagine, because most of us, 99% of us in the world, have never been in this situation. So to be in that situation and then still turn around and say, do not feel bad about what you've done. Like, this had to happen in order for me to be put in position. Like, that is such a humble, it's a humble standpoint. It's so graceful. And there's a lot I think that all of us can learn from that. And so I wrote down that grace doesn't ignore what was done, it reinterprets it through the eyes of purpose. And we have to find the purpose behind the pain. So we have to understand that betrayal a lot of times pushes us into position. I did a video a couple years ago as a part of a podcast, and it was just the thought that like sometimes God makes us uncomfortable because in any other circumstance we wouldn't have moved. And so sometimes the betrayal has to happen so that you will move. I often think that because I know that God's promise is predetermined, like God knew the plan that He had for us before we were even born. And so I think because we have free will, we have the ability to kind of navigate and move through however we see fit for our lives. But I think in doing that, sometimes we prolong our time in the waiting room. And I define the waiting room as the time period between our reality and where God has purpose for us to go. So the distance between reality and the promise is the waiting period. And we find ourselves in the waiting room as we're waiting to get from one point to the next. And so I think that sometimes betrayal can push us into the next place on the path because sometimes we can find ourselves stagnant where everything is just too comfortable. And that might be a job, it could be a relationship. Um, it could be a lot of things. It could be like it doesn't even have to be like an intimate relationship. It could be a friendship. It could be a business partnership, and we can find ourselves complacent and very comfortable to a point where we don't seek different. We don't care to evolve and we lose sight of the promise. And so I think that sometimes God will put us into positions that are uncomfortable because it forces us to move. It forces us to do different. It forces us to reach outside of what makes us comfortable. And so there is, in that essence, when we think about it, it's like almost like you want to tell those people thank you. It's like, I know in the moment it hurt me and you were wrong, but thank you for forcing me to stay committed to God's promise for me because God's promise for me is always going to outweigh the promise that I have for myself. His plan is always going to be exponentially better than my plan for me. So sometimes when you think about feeding the ones who starved you, like Joseph did, they came in, he prepared a feast for them. He sent them with a bunch of food. And he even gave them their money back. He said, "Here you go. It's all on me." Um, Despite what had happened to him. But it's because he was no longer in a place of hurting. He was no longer, or I mean, the Bible doesn't actually ever show him being in a place of feeling betrayed or angry or frustrated or anything, which I think is good. Um, but we can imagine that there was probably some of that there, but his story doesn't focus on that part. It focuses on the redemption that happens after our name has been sullied, after people have gossiped about us, after things haven't turned out in the ways that we would expect them to. And so, again, I ask the question, if God asked you to help the one that hurt you, would you be able to do it? Would you gladly do it? Could you do it? And if not, then what healing needs to happen in you to a place where you can stop blocking your own blessings? So we're almost done here, guys. I just have a little bit more. A little bit more. I want to just talk about the fact that a lot of us are probably waiting for apologies. We're waiting for people to admit they're wrong. We're waiting to see, like I said, there's two different sides. Either you're waiting for revenge or you're waiting for apology. A lot of times, if you're not over a situation, either you want to see karma come and get them, or you want them to just acknowledge, take accountability, and you want to see an apology. Most times, you don't receive an apology, honestly, from people that have betrayed you. You end up having to find closure on your own because people have a really hard time with accountability. They really do, especially for things that they are ashamed of or are not mature enough to realize were inappropriate. So that's the first part. But there is, again, power in letting go. And we see that in scripture, Joseph did not wait for their apology to act like the anointed man that he had become. We expect, based on what we saw from his behavior of him preparing the feast and giving them money back and sending them with food, and later, like, welcoming them to come and live and, have land and resources and all the things, we realize that he had to have forgiven them. That's the only way that that could have happened, because he didn't do it begrudgingly. We see him embrace his brothers and provide for them, and he was in a position where he had great power and he had favor with the Pharaoh. And so if he had wanted them to die, he was well within the power to be able to get revenge for what they had done to him. And then he chose not to. So we have to, and I touched on this earlier, part of the reason why we have to let these things go, this betrayal, this frustration, the disappointment, is not because that person deserves it, because maybe they don't. They may still be doing the same thing that they did to you to other people. They do not deserve it, but you do. And you deserve not to be shackled by negativity and the feelings that you're holding over the situation. You deserve to be able to have the impact over the earth that God has ordained you to have. You deserve abundance and overflow. You deserve peace that surpasses all understanding. You deserve the glory of God that only He can provide. And so I don't want you to let the wound stop the work. There is work to be done here on earth, and God has called each and every one of us to hold a certain role in that work. I don't want you to let the wound stop the work. Just because they hurt you, just because they didn't understand you, just because they betrayed you, just because they didn't reciprocate your efforts, that is not an excuse for you to let the wound stop the work. And so, again, in Joseph's case, forgiving them did not make what they did right. It just made Joseph ready. I'm going to say that again. Forgiving them did not make what they did right, but it made Joseph ready. He was then ready for his calling. He was ready for the crown. He was ready for the lives that he was meant to save. And so we have to then ask ourselves, maybe the real test of favor isn't how we handle promotion when God promotes us to new opportunities and promotes us to new titles and new responsibilities. Maybe that's not the mark of favor. Maybe, perhaps, just maybe, the real mark of favor is how we handle the people who once tried to prevent our promotion. Those people that talked about you, the people that shunned you, the people that kicked you out, that took things from you, that preyed on your downfall. How will you treat those people who tried to prevent, who tried to knock you down, who tried to circumvent what God had planned for you? How are you able to show up in front of those people? That will show the true mark of the favor over your life. Because again, favor is not a feeling. It's not something that I just conjure up because that's what I want today. Favor is something that only is present through the presence of God. And so you cannot say that you are this God-fearing person, that you are a man or woman after God's own heart, yet you allow the negativity, the bitterness, the nastiness, the unhealed actions of people allow you to not reach the group of people that God has prepared you and has sent you to minister to. So, yeah, that's the message for today. That's the message for today. So I love the just the conversation around Joseph and who he was able to become despite the circumstances that he found himself and that he was placed in, that people designed for him to be in out of their own jealousy and their own insecurities and all the things. So I don't see any questions. So hopefully this conversation was fruitful for you. If you are interested in more conversations like this, then I encourage you to join my community, which is a sisterhood for finding peace in the pause. And so there are more conversations like this. There are daily journal prompts. We have a book club. We have just a lot of conversations surrounding real deal things, and it allows us to do the deep work that is necessary. We also have a prayer room, we have a praise room. And so it's just really healthy, hearty conversations around the things that we need to talk more about because they're things that people are really struggling with in real time. So visit thewaitingroomcollective.com if you are interested. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Make sure that you tune in at 9 p.m. for tomorrow's live. And we will be looking at another story and really getting more further into how to help the ones that have hurt us. So it's really just a deep dive into how to express grace over any grudges that we may be feeling or experiencing. So make sure that y'all tune in for that, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Make sure you like and subscribe, and yeah, bye.